Hi there everybody, today we're going to be working through part 2 of support and movement in animals. Now if you recall, we've covered the skeleton. We've actually covered, let's just recap here a little bit. We did the hydrostatic skeleton, which was a skeleton that was made up of liquid or fluid, which ran through the sulum or central cavity in an animal's body, okay, that worked with a hydrostatic skeleton. There it would be the pressure of this fluid as well as the muscles contracting and relaxing, which would cause the animal to move and also help the animal to stabilize. So what we have there is that, or the disadvantage would be that if it was very dry, this animal could dehydrate, and if it was dehydrated, it would definitely impact on its movement of its body. Also, your hydrostatic skeleton doesn't protect the internal organs. Then we had the exoskeleton, which we would find in insects, where you have the head and the thorax, which is made of this thick chitinous substance which protected the internal organs. It formed a point of attachment for the legs and the wings, all right, and you had the big soft abdomen that stuck out the back, all right, and that would protect, and it would also not depend on whether it was wet or moist or dry or whatever. It would prevent desiccation, okay, for your terrestrial animals. And then we did the endoskeleton. Endoskeleton, us. And we spoke about the skeleton being divided into 2 parts. We had, in humans, we have the axial skeleton, which is the head or the skull, the vertebral column, and the rib cage. All right, and we had the appendicular as an appendix, the appendicular skeleton, which was which attached to the pelvic girdle and the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdles, so our lower limbs and our upper limbs. Okay, we now carry on from there. We have the skeleton, those bones, bone tissue, or skeleton made up of bone tissue, cartilage, very important, and then our ligaments, ligaments and tendons, which make up the joints. Now, if it wasn't for joints, people, we wouldn't be able to move. And we have different types of joints. Now, there are 2 joints you already know. Okay, you know, or examples of 2 joints. You know the ball and socket joint, and you know the pivot joint. The pivot joint in the arm, okay, and the knee, and the ball and socket joint, which was here between the clavicle and scapula, and your humerus, which is the top bone of the arm, all right, and the femur into the pelvis. So ball and socket, ball and socket. But they are examples of a specific type of joint, which is called a synovial joint. We also get cartilaginous joints, and we get fibrous joints. So let's look at our joints and how and why we are able to move. Joints, they formed where 2 bones meet. Now, if we look at bones, let's go with orange today, where 2 bones meet. You've got, if I look at my finger here, I've got this bone, which is a phalange, and a phalange there, which is the 2nd digit, and I can bend it. All right. The fact that I'm able to bend this joint here is because the 2 bones that are next to each other are held in place, and they're held in place by a whole bunch of things. Number 1, you're going to have a tendon or tendons. You're going to have muscle attachments, so you're going to have ligaments, okay? And it's the way this joint works. That depends on how it is joined. Now, remember this, bones are held in place by ligaments. So ligaments hold bone to bone. You must remember this because you'll be asked this often. So ligaments hold bone to bone. Tendons attach muscles to bones. So that's M to B. Okay? Joints are classified as, now we've got three types. We've got fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, and synovial joints. Okay, fibrous joints, they're fixed. Now use your common sense. Where would a joint be fixed so that it can't move at all? Think hard. And while you're thinking, take your fingers and put it here and hold your skull, your cranium. Okay? Clearly the bones of your cranium don't move around. You want them to be completely and utterly and totally fused. You don't want movement there. If there is movement, it's going to be absolute minimal movement. So fibrous joints are fixed. They cannot move. For example, the skull. Okay? Then we've got cartilaginous joints. They are partly movable. Now, where do we have partial movement? Come. Where do we have partial movement? Correct, the vertebra. We don't want our vertebra moving around. We'll end up with a slip disc. And our synovial joints are all the other joints in your body. So your hands, your feet, your elbows, your shoulders, all those movements are all because of your synovial joints. So people, remember, bones, ligaments hold bones to bone. Tendon holds muscle to bone. Fibrous joints, they fixed. Cartilaginous joints, partial movement. And synovial joints, free movement. Okay, now let's look at our joints here. We have our fibrous joints. There is no movement, nothing, zip, zero, zilch. Bones are joined with fibrous tissue, okay, the sutures of the skull. Okay, so you're not going to forget that one. Then we've got cartilaginous joints. Now cartilage has got some restricted movement and it's slight. And those are the discs between the vertebra of the spine and also the cartilage between the pubic bones. Now your pubic bone is where you've got the two parts of the pelvis as it joins in the front of your pelvis. That join there would be a cartilaginous joint. And it doesn't just move around, but it is slightly flexible. And then we have our synovial joints. So fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, and synovial joints. Right now, of our synovial joints, there are 4 types of joints. Okay, firstly, we have the ball and socket joint. I'm going to get another color here. Let's go pink. We've got the ball and socket joint. Now, there's nothing scientifically secretive about a ball and a socket. So a ball and socket joint, your hip, for example, your pelvis here, will form the socket, and the end of your femur, which is this long bone, forms the ball. So the two go ploops, and they stay in place. But it means that you have complete and free movement. All right, so ball and socket, movement in all directions. Your hip joint and your shoulder joint. So your shoulder joint and your hip joint. If you've ever watched someone swim fly and they come out of the water and they go in, that's a perfect rotation, and very often your fly swimmers will end up with rotator cuff problems, which is the muscles and the tendons and the ligaments and everything else that grinds inside your butt, including the rotator cuff. It's where the rotation of the shoulder occurs. Then we have the gliding joint. Now, if you look at the words ball and socket, socket, ball, it fits in. Gliding joint, it glides along. And now think of somebody skiing along. You glide, or skating. It's a flat surface of one bone, links with the surface of the next bone. Now, where do we have gliding? We have in the wrist and in the ankle. In other words, the metacarpals and the metatarsals. Okay, glide. Look here. Okay, look how nicely your wrist glides. It just glides along. All right, that's gliding. And you can do the same movements with your ankle. That's gliding joint. It is able to do all these wonderful things. Then, and it's to do with the metacarpals and the metatarsals. You've got a flat surface, links with the next surface. And then we look at a hinge joint. Now, where will you find a hinge? You find a hinge at a door. Now, if I have a doorway and the door opens and it closes, but because of the way a doorway is made, the door can't go the other direction. It can only go in one direction. So a door opens and it closes. It can't go further back. It closes where it closes, and then it opens and it closes. So it's a hinge. It's because of the hinges on the door. We have hinge joints in our body, which would be a joint that can only move in one direction. So your elbow. If I straighten my elbow, it can't bend the other way. The bones stop it from moving in the other direction. So this would be a hinge joint. So just on this upper limb, and remember the same would apply to your lower limb, you have here the ball and socket joint, which is free movement. We have our hinge joint at the elbow, which has restricted movement, and then you have the gliding joint at the wrist, or the metacarpals, flat bone to another bone there. So gliding, hinge, ball and socket. Okay, and here you'd have your elbow, your knees, your fingers, your toes. Think of your fingers. If my fingers were to move that direction, this finger would be broken. All right, it moves in one direction. The same with your thumb. It moves in one direction. Okay, this joint here. We're not talking about this joint here, which can rotate. All right, then you have your pivot joint. Now your pivot joint, okay, if something is able to pivot, it can rotate. You have a rotating movement as one bone pivots on another bone. So a pivot would be if you stood like this, and you know how ballerinas, and they lift their arms and they lift, and then they pivot on one toe, and they go round and down, like a spinning top. That would be to pivot. And pivot there would be the radius and the axis bones of the spine, because what can we do with our heads? Look, we are able to pivot as we turn our neck around on the atlas and the axis, and the radius and the ulnar bones at the wrist. Okay, so it's the radius and the ulnar specifically. Those would be your pivot joints. All right, now, this is an example of a synovial joint. Okay, I'm going to write here. It is a synovial joint. And the problem is that with a synovial joint, when a synovial joint becomes inflamed, all right, that synovial fluid starts to sort of almost swell, and you get a whole bunch of liquid on there, which stops the joint from being able to move. Perfect example would be water on the knee. And if you've injured your knee playing soccer or rugby, and it gets all swollen, the same with your ankle, it'll get all swollen and full of fluid. That fluid is there to prevent you from moving that joint until it has healed. Okay, so especially if you've healed the tendon or the ligament. So what you've got is your synovial fluid. Now clearly over here, you would have your ligaments holding the bone to each other. You would have tendons that were here as well, but we're not teaching you first year medicine. What we are doing is we're teaching you the basic structure of a synovial joint. So you would have your spongy bone and your spongy bone. All right, you'd have your articular capsule. Now, articular means to move around. Okay, so any two surfaces that were touching each other would be articulating. They would be moving against each other. So your articular cartilage, you're going to have cartilage. Let's make another color here. Make it green. You're going to have your cartilage all the way around here, mainly here, where the two bones are going to be touching each other. And over here. All right, so those are the two surfaces of the bones would have articular cartilage, and that cartilage is normally specifically hyaline cartilage. Okay, you've got this capsule that is around the synovial fluid, and then clearly in here, in the middle, you have your synovial fluid. Oh, mind you, I think the label's down here. Yeah, there's your synovial fluid. So all over here is the synovial fluid. And when you've injured a joint like your elbow or your knee, you get a lot of swelling in there. So what that does is it prevents that joint from moving, because if it's swollen like that, there is very little movement that can take place. You've also got the synovial membrane. So you've got the capsule, then you've got the synovial membrane to house the synovial fluid. All right, so that would apply to your ball and socket, your gliding joints, your hinge joints, and your pivot joints. All right, all of these joints are synovial joints, so therefore all of them will have this basic structure. You'd have the bones, the articulating cartilage that would be between the two bones, and you would then have the synovial capsule with the synovial fluid in the middle. Okay. Here is specifically a ball and socket joint, the one at the hip. How do we know this is the hip? Because the femur has this really big, sticky, outy ball over there, whereas in your humerus, the ball isn't as pronounced. So you would be able to tell, is it the femur or the humerus? All right, people, so we have this huge big ball here, which is the head of the femur. All right, you have the socket there. Now, you don't have to know that it's the acetabulum. That is sort of extra info, but there's your socket. So you've got your ball and the socket, and the two fit into each other. There's the hip bone, which is part of the pelvis. Okay, I'm going to put your pelvis, because this is part of your pectoral girdle. And then you have the ligament, which is inside that joint. And that is what has to be held in place. Now, when you have rugby players and they injure their shoulders, and as they're playing, very often, because of especially contact rugby, and the guys that, especially the guys that do a lot of tackling or in the tight five, what would happen there is they end up with dislocated shoulders. Now, the shoulder gets dislocated the first time. It is incredibly painful, and it gets popped back. You can pop it back in. After 2 or 3 times or 4 times of this shoulder being dislocated and being popped back, eventually that ligament starts to stretch, as well as the tendons that are now holding the muscle and the bone in place. Okay, so eventually the person just sort of has to bump slightly, and clips out the shoulder will come. So they undergo an operation to make sure that the ligaments and the tendons are all realigned to keep that bone in place, and it is incredibly painful to have done. All right, but if you don't, then you end your sporting career. Here you have the hinge joint. Now the hinge joint, remember, at the knee and also the elbow. Here, what you're going to have are the different processes of the femur. All right, so that's why we know it is in the knee, because there's a femur, not a humerus. And then we've got the ligaments inside the joint. They're the ligaments. Remember, ligaments hold bone to bone, and tendons are muscle to bone. Now you've got the tibia, which is going to be in line with the big toe, and the fibula, which is on the side. Immediately this will tell you that this structure we're looking at here, if the tibia is on this side, so the tibia, remember, if you look at a diagram, this is the right side, that's the left side. So right side, the left side. It's as if you're looking at a person lying in front of you. So right and left. If the tibia is on the left, it's going to tell you that it is which leg? It's going to be the left leg. Why? Because it's going to be in line with the toe, which is the left toe. The tibia is the tibia is always on the inside, the fibula is always on the outside. Okay, so that will tell you which leg you're looking at here as well. Fibula and the tibia. Okay, now we go to human locomotion, how we move. Why do we move? How do we move? First of all, we've got our bones. And what do the bones do? The skeleton, it provides the framework and the internal core structure. So we've got this structure, and around that structure, we've got the muscles, and the muscles are attached to the bone with tendons, and you've got the ligaments holding the bone to the bone, but that forms the main core structure. Then we've got the joints. And the joints, we've got fibrous joints. What do? No movement. For example, the bones in the cranium, it's the sutures where they join. We have the cartilaginous joints. Okay, very slight movement, it's very restricted. We have the vertebra of the spinal cord and the cartilage between the two pubic bones. All right, we don't want movement there. And then we have our synovial joints, and what do? We have free movement, and we have free movement in one or more directions, okay? So we look at our different joints. Why are they there? They help us to stand, to sit, to walk, to run. And if you've ever watched gymnastics or people, just about any sport on television, if you watch sport and you watch the way athletes move, you need every single little bit of bone structure to work. And the bones only work because of the muscles. And the muscles can only make the bones work because of the tendons. And the bones will only stay in place, so not just go bloop, okay, because they have ligaments joining. So ligaments join bone to bone. Tendons hold muscle to bone, and it's the muscles that choreograph the movement of the skeleton. Okay, if we look at our ligaments, bone to bone, and we have tendons, muscle to bone. And all of that helps us to balance and know how to move. Let's look at question 1. It says, study the following diagram showing the main bones of the pectoral girdle. Okay, pectoral girdle immediately tells us it's our upper girdle, and the human arm, which is the forelimb, and answer the questions that follow. Okay, we've got A, B, we've got C, D, G, H, and E, F. Okay, now clearly those aren't labels. So bone X, that's the scapula. And what is the scapula? Or we can call it, it's the okay. Now we take this and we say, okay, and this is the clavicle. Identify X. We've already said it's the scapula. Or shoulder blade. It's this big flat thing at the back of our backs. All right, that's our 1 mark there. Parts of some of these bones meet at a certain joint. By using the letters A to H, only state which parts of the bones are the shoulder joint. Now people, have a look here. This bone here is the humerus. Okay, so this is the humerus. That's going to form the ball. This structure here has to form the hole, or the hole into which that ball is going to fit. So if you look at the skeleton here, or let me use this arm here, all right, this is the humerus. The humerus at the end here has a ball. That ball has to fit into a socket. The clavicle is going to be at the back, okay? I mean, the clavicle is the shoulder, a collarbone, which is here, and the scapula is at the back. So where these two meet, that is where the ball or the socket is going to be for this ball to fit into. So it's going to be F, it's going to be part F here, okay? And you're going to have part B is going to fit into part F. So where F makes that structure like that, B is going to slot into there. So when we answer this question, which parts? It will be, let's just go back here, B and F, or F and B. All right. Name the type of synovial joint that is located at the following parts of the body. Now you should know that at the elbow, can it go further than a point? No. So it's the same as a door frame? Yes. So it's the same as the hinges on a door? Yes. Therefore it is a what joint? It is a hinge joint. All right. Now it says where the upper, at least where the lower limb joins the pelvis. Now the lower limb is the leg. And where does the leg join the pelvis? What joint do we have there? It's that big fat femur's head that goes into this big round structure in the pelvis. So it is a what joint? It's a ball and socket joint. And where else will we find a ball and socket joint? Here, at the shoulders. All right, people, and then we look at the wrist. Now, if with the wrist, specifically here, it glides. So it glides through, and therefore, your carpals here, your wrist, in the wrist, is going to be a gliding joint. Okay, it glides around. That was easy enough. All right, now we look at antagonistic muscles. Now, antagonistic always reminds me of someone who wants to fight. If someone's antagonistic, it means they bait you and they bait you and they just want to fight. Boxers are antagonistic. So think of it that way. Whenever someone is going to be angry and aggressive, it's going to be met with something that is going to have to respond. Now, your muscles work antagonistically as well. In other words, the one muscle's behavior affects the behavior of the other muscle. So we call it antagonistic. So if I want to take my hand, my fingers, and touch my shoulder, I am moving. Okay? How does it happen? The muscles here have to contract. In fact, it's this muscle here, my biceps, contracts. The triceps must relax, because if both these muscles stay extended, my arm's going to go nowhere. All right, so one set of muscles will contract, the opposite muscles have to relax. Take a finger. If I bend my finger, these muscles must contract, and these have to relax, otherwise this finger goes nowhere. All right, it's antagonistic movement. Voluntary skeletal muscles cover the skeleton and it gives the body shape. Now think about muscles. A lot of people go to gym, a lot of people do sport to keep their bodies looking good. What are you keeping looking good? You can't change the skeleton. The skeleton's there. It's your structure. It's your core structure. But you can change the shape of the muscles. All right? And the amount of fat that you have underneath the layers. But anyway, here we go. So the skeleton gives the body shape. The point where the muscle is attached to an immovable bone is called the origin. The point where a muscle attaches to a movable bone is called the insertion. Okay, so the bone that is immovable, the one that's not going to move in that movement or in the action that you want to perform. So where it doesn't move is going to be the origin. Okay, that's where the muscle sits, it's attached. And then you have the insertion, it will insert into the part that is going to move. So that would cause, if I wanted to lift my arm, this is immovable, this is movable. So insertion here, okay, and that part is now going to lift. I mean origin, insertion. Origin here, insertion there to lift that arm. So if it is immovable, just to recap, if it is immovable, it is the origin. It's where it originates. If it is movable, then it is the insertion. So you insert at the movable part. Why? Because that's the part that's going to be able to go left or right or up or down. Whereas you want the origin, you want it to originate in an immovable place. Another way of remembering it is where you come from, okay? Where you originate from as a human being is immovable. You can never ever change that. If you were born in Johannesburg, okay, the city of Johannesburg, in 100 years or 80 years time, when you are an old person and you have lots of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, you cannot change the fact that you were born in Johannesburg. So you originated from Johannesburg. So your origin is immovable. But where you end up is, well, that's where you end up is the insertion, and it's movable. You can either go and end up living in Cape Town or in Durban or in Free State and in Bloemfontein. That's immovable. That's movable. You can move, you can change, you insert there into those new towns, but your origin is immovable. And that's the best way to remember it, people. Now, antagonistic movements of muscles. Remember this, please, and this is very important. At least 2 sets of muscles are involved in any antagonistic movement. Number 2, 1 set will contract and 1 set will relax. Okay? So, what they're saying there is in any antagonistic movement, there are 2 sets of muscles. I've got the muscles on the front of my humerus and the muscles on the back of my humerus. 1 set of muscles will contract. The other set of muscles must relax. If I want to open my arm, this set of muscles here must contract and these must relax, or they are not going to open. All right, so antagonistic movements, they're always 2 sets of muscles. 1 set will contract, 1 set will relax. The movement of the bone is the result of leverage. Okay, that leverage is going to be one or the other power points. Now, when an action is performed, okay, let's look at. You want to bend your arm at the elbow. The biceps in the front of the arm contracts. Okay, if you want to straighten your arm at the elbow, the triceps at the back of the arm is going to contract to open it up. It's what I've just shown you now. Okay, biceps contracts, triceps contracts, and that makes me able to move my arm at a different rate. The muscles must work antagonistically. Please make sure you can spell that word. The levers allow the action as follows. Now, when the bending of the when bending the elbow to lift the hand towards the mouth, all right, the effort lies between the fulcrum and the resistance. Now, if we look at fulcrum and resistance, okay, this here, whatever I'm lifting my hand to my mouth. This lifting the hand to my mouth, this is where the effort is. Okay, this if I put, I'm thinking I can't find anything here that I can actually put it. I've got, okay, here's a glass. If I take this glass and I put this glass in my hand, the mass of this glass, okay, that's going to be the resistance. So this is the resistance. All right, there's my resistance. Okay, the fulcrum is going to be the point here that's going to be doing the bending. All right, if you took a seesaw, and the seesaw is like this, and 2 kids on the seesaw, and they're tipping up and down, the fulcrum is the center point of the seesaw. So here's your center point. Okay, so fulcrum is at the elbow. The resistance will be your hand lifting. Okay, so there the elbow joint is the fulcrum. The mass in the hand is the resistance, and your biceps muscle must now contract. And because it must work, where there's any work, it is the effort. So this is where the effort is. So this is the fulcrum, effort, and my resistance is in the front. Okay, the triceps muscle at the back has to relax, otherwise you are not going to be able to bring your hand to your mouth. Okay, this is your antagonistic muscles. All right, there's your biceps is in the front. Your triceps is at the back. So if I'm lifting my hand towards my mouth, so the hand is coming up, what's going to happen? The biceps contracts, and you're not going to be able to see that, so let's get black. Your biceps is going to contract, and the triceps must relax. Here is the effort, here is the resistance. There's the resistance. Here's your fulcrum, all right, and your biceps, that when it contracts is the effort. Now, if I open the hand and this then goes down, as the hand moves down, there's my fulcrum is still there, okay? But what is happening now? These two muscles work opposite. So the triceps is now going to have to contract, and the biceps must relax. And that's the way all movement occurs. So skeletal action, we have striated muscles. Okay, now let's see if you remember all of this from grade 10. You had 3 types of muscle tissue that you learned. Number 1, okay, well, we'll start from the outside and work in. Number 1 was skeletal muscle, or what we call striated muscle. Okay, it had little striations in it so that it can contract and relax. Okay, then we had cardiac tissue, and what did the cardiac tissue do, or the cardiac muscle, what did it do? It causes the pulsing of the heart, and therefore the heartbeat. Okay, and then we had smooth muscle, and smooth muscle was all our organs. All the blood vessels in our body, all the organs in our body are made of smooth muscle. And smooth muscle cannot be controlled by your will. So you can't think, I want my liver to work, or I want my kidneys to start filtering urine, or I want my stomach to start digesting. You can't do that. You cannot control smooth muscle with your will. It's very difficult to control cardiac muscle, but striated muscle, which is your skeletal muscle, you can control all the time. You decide, I want to lift this glass to my mouth so I can have a sip. In order to do that, my fingers need to close and contract around the glass. My biceps has to contract to move it to my mouth. It's not going to move it to behind me or to on top of my head. It's going to move it to my mouth. All of that it is voluntary. I voluntarily decide I'm going to move striated muscle. So that's voluntary muscle, because why? We can control it with our will. We control it with the central nervous system. Okay, these muscles are attached to bones of the skeleton. So attached to the bones of the skeleton, when a muscle contracts, the opposite one is going to relax. A flexor, now this you must remember, a flexor muscle will bend a limb, while an extensor is going to relax. So people think, you watch, I remember my son when he was little, and he'd say, Mommy, look at my big muscle, look. What was he doing? He was flexing. All boys flex their muscles at some stage of their lives. Flexing, I'm strong, look at my big muscle. So this is flexing. So whichever muscle contracts is the flexor, and whichever muscle relaxes is the, and this is so easy, is the extensor. Why? It has to extend. Look at the fingers here. Here, if I bend my finger this way, these muscles are contracting, okay? And these muscles, so these will be the extensors, and these will be the flexors. I'm flexing, I'm pulling it in. So flexors will always bend the limb, and your extensor will always relax when that happens. So muscles attached to bone by a tough, relatively inelastic tendon. How many times have we gone through this? Tendons always connect muscle to bone, and ligaments attach bone to bone. So they all work together. At one end, the tendon is continuous with the outer covering of the muscle, while the opposite end combines with the outer layer of the bone. Remember, what are we doing? We are connecting the muscle to the bone. The muscle cells are called myofibrils. Anything with myo means muscle. So myofibrils, they group together to form they group together by an outer membrane called the sarcolemma. Sorry, I lost my place there. The muscle fibers then group together to form the fasciculi. Okay, each bundle is held together by the perimysium, and the bundles are grouped finally together to form the epimysium. Now remember, epimysium is on the outside. It's covered by the epimysium. So any myo means muscle. Epi always means outside. Okay, so epi right on the outside, peri almost on the outside. Okay, so let's have a look at the diagram. It's probably easier to learn a diagram anyway. Here you have your tendon, which is on the one side. Here I have the muscles. So you've got the different myofibrils, and what those myofibrils do is on them, they have a little band called one sarcomere. So there we have it. This is what it looks like. And there are these A bands and I bands and L bands and whatever we have with regard to muscles. So what happens when a muscle contracts? Those little myofibrils, okay, in that myofibril, here, you have this part that's darker, and you have these little parts here that form almost like a bridge. So when a muscle contracts, you have the bridges closing together. So it does this, it pulls the muscle together, and to do that it needs a lot of energy. There's a lot of work that goes into contracting a muscle. We need ATP, we need energy. So when those bridges are decreased and they pull together to pull, you can almost imagine you pulling this little road together, then that is a contraction of the muscle. So let's have a look at what we have to say here. So we have the myofibrils, we're going to have actin and myosin, okay, and they form an interlocking structure. So they literally do this, and then they interlock. All right, when the myofibrils contract, those little bridges that forms between the actin and the myosin filaments, they pull together. So as they pull together, these filaments pull into each other and they form an interlocking action, which is why the muscle now bulges. Okay, the myofibrils shorten, causing the muscle to contract. Now remember, myofibrils, your muscle fibers, are going to need calcium ions, and they need ATP, energy. ATP is always energy. It needs the ATP and the energy to contract. So all of that there literally means you've got your fibrils, which are the little fibers of muscle tissue, and what happens is your fibers sit like this, and in between your myosin, you've got the actin, the little bridges. And as a muscle contracts, those bridges pull into each other like that. So the muscle becomes shorter. Why? Because it's interlocking. And as it interlocks, that is what the contraction is. Okay, let's look at our questions here. The diagram below shows the legs of an athlete while he is waiting for a race to start. Okay, if we look at these letters A to F, they show some muscles as well as joints that will be used during the race. Okay, so there's our athlete. All right, now if we look at all of these labels, let's try and label them as best as we can. So have I got a black here? Yeah. So the first one here, this is your gluteus maximus. That's the posterior muscle. So that's your glute. We just call it a glute. All right. Then here you've got the ball of the ball and socket joint of the femur. Remember, the femur is this long bone from your knee to the hip. All right. Now, Clearly D is the knee. And right on the front of the knee, remember we have the kneecap called the patella. All right, then over here we have our quad muscle. All right, here is the calf muscle. Now, in order for any movement, okay, and this will be the, okay, that's the, I can't remember all these muscle names or the proper names. I used to know them all, I don't know them anymore. And this will be the shin muscle. But you're not required to know them either. And it just, sure, they have, if you look at any picture with all the muscle names, they are incredibly difficult to remember. But if we call these are our quads and our hamstrings, then you'll be fine. And this is a nice big fat hamstring here. So clearly this guy is getting ready to now launch himself out of his starting blocks. Okay. So it says, when the starter's gun is fired, let me just get another color here. When the starter's gun is fired, the athlete's right leg will straighten. So have a look here. His right leg, this leg here, is going to propel him forward. All right? Maybe what you could do is get yourself down on the ground and put your one leg behind and the other leg in front. Okay, now remember the front leg, this leg here is your right leg. That's the one that's going to propel you forward. So just go down now while we're going through this and just feel. Now, as this gun goes off, the right leg is in the front. It's going to straighten and it's going to push the athlete upwards and forwards. Which letters, A to F, indicate the muscles that will contract and relax? So let's look at relax first. Okay, which muscles here are going to relax? Now, I want you to, wherever you are sitting watching this, okay, take your right leg, just stand, all right? Put your right leg in front and bend down. Now push yourself forward. Move your weight from your back foot onto your right foot. I want you to feel. Now, as you push forward and this leg straightens, feel which muscles are working. People, you are dealing with the human body. Guess what? You're a walking, talking practical of whatever you are studying in life sciences at the moment. So feel the muscles. And if you're feeling your muscles and taking note of your muscles, you will find that this muscle here, that calf muscle, shin muscle, that muscle is going to relax. Okay, as you're pushing forwards and you're pushing up, okay, the shin muscle is going to relax. It's the only one that's not working. But as you're pushing forward, every other muscle that you have is going to be working hard. So if we look back at our diagram, we are going to find gluteus maximus here is going to be working hard because it's pushing us forward. That's why ladies do so many lunges when they go to gym, because it gives them a nice firm posterior. Okay, you're working the gluteus, your glute at the back here. So that glute is going to contract. If we look at the hams, at least the quad at the front here of the leg, that is going to be working hard because what is it doing? It's pushing the person up. So this muscle is contracting, it's working very hard. That's where most of your push comes from, is from this quad driving backwards. It's contracting and pushing everything backwards. And then clearly the calf muscle. All right, so if an athlete wants really good starts off a starting block, they're going to need a good glute, they're going to need very good hammies, quads, and they're going to need strong calf muscles. And if you look at any kind of sprinter, for example, if you look at their muscles, the quads and their hamstrings are so defined. But more than anything, it's that quad. Why? Because it's the quad that relaxes, and the contracting of that quad is as it propels the person forward. What is the idea of running? It's to be propelled forward. All right. And calf muscles. I have yet to see a sprinter that has a sort of a tiny, miserable calf muscle. They all have these big rugby ball calf muscles. All right. Very well defined legs. Okay. So we've covered that. So to relax, let's just write it, would be F, and then clearly to contract would be B, I think it was C. B, C, and E. So it's B, C, and E. Okay. Now, show the leg shown in the diagram has different types of joints. Okay, which of the following letters A to F indicates a hinge joint and a ball and socket joint? Really, people, a hinge joint will be the knee, which is D, and a ball and socket will be A. So a hinge joint is D and a ball and socket is A. Remember, your hinge joints, your elbows, and your knee. It's a hinge joint. It can't go any further. There's something that blocks it from being able to open any more. All right, gliding is the wrist. Okay, ball and socket is full rotation. Which one have I missed? Oh, pivot joint. Okay, so there are all our joints, and now we go on to sprains and injuries. And if we look at injuries, at the moment, I mean, at any one time, when you have any kind of big sport fixtures like the World Rugby Cup and the World Soccer Cup and the World whatever Cup and the Summer Games and the Winter Games, you're going to find athletes will get hurt and they won't be in the team, or they will be injured and they will be on a rest period. Okay, lots of sprains and strains, and then when there are car accidents and things, you have fractures. So let's look at them. What's the difference in a sprain and a strain? Now with a sprain, okay, the joint is forced beyond its normal degree of movement. In other words, the ligaments may be partially torn. Okay, remember, your ligaments hold the bone to the bone. So if that ligament is partially torn, you now have what we call a sprain. There's a lot of pain, it's very sore. There's bruising, there's swelling. Why? Because you need to rest that joint so that the ligament can grow properly, okay, and heal properly. So it's like, for example, when you twist an ankle. A strain with a T, so a strain with a T applies to muscles that are torn, all right? So, it takes a long time for the muscles to recover completely, sometimes 6 to 8 weeks. All right, so you can still hope that a sprain, you can push it and maybe get back to training after 4 or 5 weeks. But with a strain and the muscles not working, people, there is no way you can do it in under 6 weeks. Okay, it takes a long time for that muscle to recover completely, and they are common with sportsmen and women, especially when they do not warm up properly. Because you're expecting this muscle to work in a dynamic way, and you haven't said to it, listen, let's just warm you up and get some blood circulating in there and stretch you a little bit. So warming up and warming down is always very important for athletes. So let's just check again. For a sprain, you're looking at a ligament that may be harmed, and in a strain, you're talking about the muscle. Okay. Here are some pictures. This is a sprained ankle. Okay, look at how the bruising is over here. The ankle is also swollen, which is a bit difficult because we don't know what size this person's foot was to start off with. But if you look here, it's very, very swollen. All right, then here, this is a beaut. Look at this strain. This is terrible. I mean, look at this nice big fat bruise over here. And there's an even bigger bruise on this side. This is the same bruise, but a little while, it's from a different angle in the mirror. So clearly you're looking at it in a mirror version versus a photo of the bruise. Okay, now look at dislocations. Shame. And this is very often a rugby or any contact sport. End up with the dislocations, shoulder dislocations, hip dislocations. No, oh, I suppose you'd have like your karate and taekwondo and that kind of thing. You could probably look at somebody kicking you very hard and dislocating your hip. But shoulder injuries, very often contact sport, especially like rugby, etc. Happens when the bone in a joint is dislodged. And it is very, very, very soft. I've got an x-ray here that I'm going to show you. The ligaments that hold the bone in place are damaged and the muscles are stressed, and in some cases the muscles can also tear. All right? Common example is a shoulder dislocation, especially contact games. Now I have to show you this. if you look at this x-ray here, this is on the, okay, I'm just going to write on here. So this here would be the right side, and that is the left side. So, okay, if you have a look at that dislocation, on the right side, that's the ball sitting perfectly inside the joint. Okay, on the left side, that whole ball has been moved out of the actual socket structure. So you must know, it's got the ligaments are completely pulled now, all right? And that thing is now sitting, this bone is sitting on the side here. It can only be absolute, total, excruciating pain. Okay, so a common one is a shoulder dislocation, but the x-ray I found was a hip dislocation. All right, so you dislocate. It is no longer located, the ball is no longer located into the socket. You have dislocated it. Fractures. Now, fracture is a break. In other words, the bone is damaged. It's damaged, it's broken, and it can be broken in lots of different places. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to immobilize it using a plaster cast. Why? So that you can give the bone tissue a chance to repair, okay, and heal itself, and the muscle tissue around it to repair itself as well, okay, and to grow back together. What I did here was I've given you a whole variety of different types of fractures. Here we have a partial fracture, so it's the bone isn't broken all the way through, okay? Here you have a simple fracture. It's simply a break all the way through the humerus. Then we have a complete fracture, is if they're not just broken, but they actually move apart. All right, so the bones are now sitting, they're not even touching each other anymore. Okay, there's nothing holding it in place anymore. Then a broken end here is where this is a compound fracture. In other words, there are a whole bunch of pieces that are broken, and it is completely broken. This would be a commuted fracture. This is when all the little pieces also break off. So you don't just have this break, but you got little pieces of splinters sitting all around as well. And then if we look at the shape of just the hand here, you have what's called a green stick fracture, which means it's sort of broken, but broken sideways. And green stick fractures are very often prevalent with little kids, when little kids fall and break their arms and stuff. Here I've got pictures for you as well, which shows you this person had a very, very bad fracture. Now you can actually see from the different x-rays, this is the same arm, but from the side there, the bone is completely broken. So remember, this would be, I'm going to write on here, that's the radius, and this would be the ulna. All right, so here you're looking at the radius is completely broken. So what do? They put plates in, and this is what it is when they say people have got metal plates in their arms. And they put these metal plates in and screw it in place to keep the bone in the correct place so that it can now heal. There's the radius, there's the ulna, all right? And so that nothing can move it, because you must know how painful that is. And if the person's just got it in a cast, any kind of movement in the hand here will displace the bone. So they put metal pins in, those are your pins. So if you look here, when it sounds awesome when they say, oh, I had metal pins put in my arm. You almost think of like a Frankenstein, but that's exactly what it is. And then later on, they are able to remove it. And when the bone is now healed. Sometimes they just leave them in anyway. Okay, we look at muscle cramps. Now, with muscle cramps, what do we have? It is a sudden, involuntary contraction or spasm of one or more muscles. People, if you're an athlete and you don't take enough magnesium, you are going to end up with muscle cramps. Okay, potassium as well, because potassium helps with muscle cramps, but it also helps with bruising. But magnesium. That's why we end up taking extra supplements of magnesium if we are athletes and we are working hard. All right, otherwise you end up with muscle cramps, and oh my gosh, you'll be sitting there and the next thing your toe will curl up and you won't be able to do anything, or your foot will just pull straight like this, and or your calf, incredibly painful. Cyclists very often suffer from muscle cramps, and if you watch the Tour de France and all these big wonderful cycling tournaments, you will see the athletes, the cyclists, having to stop because their hamstrings or their calf muscles or their quads are cramping up. All right, incredibly sore. And I mean, just to say a muscle cramp doesn't even come anywhere close to the pain one feels, and only people that have actually gone through it will know. It often occurs after exercise, okay, or during exercise if it's very strenuous exercise, or at night, and it lasts for a few seconds. It can also last for a couple of minutes. The nerves malfunction and cause the muscle to muscle cramp, but you also have other causes. There's straining or overusing the muscles, like if you're doing long races, dehydration, lack of minerals in the diet. So the minute you have too little magnesium is especially a culprit. You end up with cramps. Poor circulation can also have cramps. So if you're a real couch potato and you still get muscle cramps and you're sitting there saying, Kathy's talking rubbish, because you know what? I get muscle cramps and I'm not a cyclist or a major athlete. Believe me, being a couch potato, you also still can get muscle cramps if you have too little of a specific mineral, okay, or poor circulation. And cramps can be very painful, and the only way to get rid of them is by stretching or gently massaging that muscle until it stops cramping. Okay, people, I've put concussion in, although it isn't strictly part of the syllabus, but it's something they could give you as a sort of a application type question. But a concussion, and I also felt you as young people need to know what a concussion is. So a concussion would be bruising of the actual brain. So if you look at when a person bumps their head very hard, okay, and you end up with blurry vision, you end up with dizziness, lightheadedness, and in severe cases you end up with vomiting, loss of memory, and also loss of consciousness. Okay, so just make sure that if anybody ever bumps their head really hard, very often people say, oh, look, they've got an egg on their head, so the bruise came out. It's got nothing to do with it. The bruise doesn't come out. You've still damaged the brain. And the diagram below will show you what we mean when we say that the brain is bruised. So whether you've got a big bump sitting on the outside of the head here or not makes absolutely no difference. It is the fact that as you come forward, the brain comes forward as well, and it bounces against the skull on the inside here, or the cranium on the inside here. If you bash your head on the back, and it hits hard, then clearly the back part of the brain is damaged. Now, if somebody, for example, bumps their head really badly on the back here, and it's bad, they won't be able to see properly. All right, they won't be able to read or see properly at all, because your occipital lobe, where you perceive sight, is at the back of the head here. So very often you can tell if the concussion is severe exactly where the brain is damaged based on what you can or can't do. And this concussion, very bad. If there's any kind of vomiting, you get the person to the hospital immediately. All right, incidence of back injuries. Okay, we look at back pain, and back pain, they say, is one of the most common health problems. Okay, now these are the causes of back pain. And remember, I'm giving you 4 here. There are 1,000. Okay. Incorrect diet. So what happens? People eat too much, they get overweight, and with that overweight, they are putting a lot of pressure on their back. Incorrect posture, standing badly, lack of exercise, also another one, and then poor body mechanics. So if you've got any kind of injury or spinal issues, and you hurt your cervical, so you fall, you slip down the stairs, that you can injure your back. Clearly, physically, you've done it. But a really bad posture, All right, and if a person's standing like this all the time, apart from the fact that you can't breathe, okay, but a poor posture can also cause it, or you stick your stomach out, or you arch your back too much, or whatever the case is, a poor posture can cause a lot of damage. Then also, your back wasn't designed to carry 500,000 kilograms. So when a person, your frame is designed to suit your body and your mass. When people become overweight because their diet isn't right, etc., then they do. You immediately put a lot of pressure on your back. So lack of exercise. We cannot survive in space. The biggest reason for that is you can give us all the oxygen, all the water, whatever we want up there. Okay, lots of food, etc., etc., pills, which is just a bunch of nutrients anyway, because that's what your body does. It converts whatever you eat into the nutrients. You would still be okay, but you know what? After a couple of months, well, not a couple, a lot of months and a couple of years, you wouldn't be able to walk. Why? Because it is the fact that we have gravity on this planet, okay, that we have compacted bones, and our bones stay compacted. And I'll give you another sort of an example. If you look at martial arts, people that do martial arts, they take a stick and they actually knock their bones. And they'll knock their bones, and I mean, you don't smash it, but you knock, 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 knock. And what it does is it makes the bones more compact and it makes them stronger. You find soccer players sometimes do it with their shin bones. It makes them more compact. So you're just bashing them all the time. You're bashing them with a solid weight. They also did it in The Karate Kid. Now, there's a movie where they're using real life physiology in the movie, but that was also it. You knock that bone so it gets used to the impact, so that when you're going to chop through a piece of wood or a block of concrete, your hand, the bones in your hand are compacted. If you're floating around in space, there is no compacting. All right, so we look at the incidence of back injuries. Well, this is what we've got. You get acute back pain. All right, that means that it lasts for a few days and it's sore and you can survive, and you go to a physio and you put ice packs on and you rest a bit and everything's fine, and eventually it's sorted. Okay, I shouldn't say kill the pain, you sort of numb the pain. All right, then you get, so that's acute. All right, then you get subacute back pain. Now, this lasts for a few days to a few weeks, okay? It's mild, it's uncomfortable, and it can be treated with a physio and ice packs and rest. So those are all fine. So acute is bad, subacute is bad, but over a long period of time. And then you get chronic back pain. And chronic back pain lasts for a long time, so 3 or more months. It is severe, so it's sore. The causes may vary from illnesses, accidents, injuries, physical changes in the structure of the spine, overextension of the spine, overexertion of the spine. In other words, you have caused yourself major problems. Okay, importance of exercise for healthy muscular and skeletal development. People, we need to exercise. And just from the emphasis that is put on this section here in an exam, I can foresee that you will get a question on something around physical exercise and being healthy and how that impacts on your skeletal system and healthy development. So we look at basic muscle size, that's inherited. You cannot make your muscles, your basic muscle size, any different. This is genetic. Okay? Exercise can increase that muscle size by up to 60%. That's why if you look at muscle, people that actually do muscle building as a sport, and you look at them when they were young children or young people, and what they look like when they are all muscular, okay? You can increase that your basic frame, your skeleton. That's inherited. You cannot increase the size of your skeleton. What you can do is you can increase the size of your muscle mass. Okay, so up to 60%. How? With exercise, with the number of mitochondria, you also increase within the fibers. All right, stamina training, you can double the ability of the mitochondria and generate ATP. Okay, that's what stamina training is, basically fitness. And how do you get fitter? It's purely because you allow you make your body, or you train your body to cope longer with a certain amount of energy. Why? Because you'd help it to start making more energy from the ATP. Okay, so when you exercise, your body stores more glycogen and oxygen. It produces less lactic acid, so you don't get as stiff when you get fitter. Okay, it also increases the strength of the muscles and the ability of the muscles to contract. When we have regular exercise, it increases the number of blood vessels supplying the muscles with blood, because you're increasing the overall size and structure of the muscle. You're making it work at a better rate. You're helping it to make more mitochondria, to get a better blood supply, to make more tissue. Okay, exercise improves coordination between the pairs of antagonistic muscles. Okay, and also it improves the speed at which muscles contract and relax. What comes to mind there would be any kind of exercise that you do. When you do it the first time, maybe your muscles aren't limber enough, or you're moving too slowly, and when you master that movement, you're able to do it quickly, efficiently, and your muscles work well together. Importance of exercise for a healthy muscular development. You've got the skeletal system requires exercise. Okay, movement and impact. That impact is very important, because that is what helps our muscles to grow, and density. So this is why we can't live on a like astronauts on the moon, where there is no gravity. The bones are immobilized. When a body is broken or fractured, we end up with muscle dystrophication. Now, if anyone knows someone, or you perhaps have had your arm in a cast, and you take the cast off, that muscle around the arm looks terrible. It looks like it's been starved, which actually it has. There hasn't been contracting and relaxing, so we have muscle dystrophication occurs. Look at the word dystrophication. Okay, the bones become brittle, and they are able to break very easily. So the physical impact of exercise ensures that we release calcium ions, and that there is good circulation in the blood. This clearly makes everything work well, and we then end up with our little bone cells, the osteocytes, getting everything that they need. Okay, and they keep making new bone tissue. So when the bones are subjected to increased stress by exercise, we can literally remodel it. And that's what I was talking about to you earlier, is that you are able to quite literally compact the bone and train it to be able to do what it is you need, especially when you do sort of cage fighting or any kind of contact type thing like that. You basically remodel the bone, okay, and it ensures that the bones are able to withstand mechanical forces, such as the old tissues removed and new deposits are put in. Here we've got people that are running. They're clearly doing a marathon here. And the more running you do, the better and the longer and the further you are able to run. Okay, now if we look at diseases, there are only 3 or 4 diseases that you need to know. The first being rickets. Now, think of the word rickets. And if you have a deficiency, a vitamin deficiency, specifically vitamin D, you end up with a rickety skeleton, because you need vitamin D to absorb calcium. So if you don't have vitamin D in your diet, you can eat platefuls of calcium and your body will absorb very little of it. So you need vitamin D to give you calcium, and you need calcium so that your bones aren't rickety. And in kids, when there is a lack of vitamin D, the kids end up with a disease called rickets. So that basically in a nutshell is what I've gone through here. So you have a deposit of the calcium salts in the bones. With rickets, the bones become soft. And because they become soft and rickety, the bones in kids will deform. Now look at this x-ray here. This is a little child, okay, and they've taken an x-ray. Here are the knees. All right, and look how bandy the child is. Look at this. Look how bandy they are, because the little bones have now bent outwards. Okay, and you can't just fix it either. Then we look at osteoporosis. Now remember, an osteocyte is a bone cell. Porous means with holes. So it becomes whole, I'm just going to put there holes. And osteo comes from a bone cell, which is osteocyte. So if we take these two words together, it is a bone cell that has made holes. Now, the only reason a bone cell will make holes is if the bone cell is no longer there. So the cavity that the little bone cell was in, the lacuna, okay, that is still there. But the little bone cell is dead, so it makes a hole. All right, osteoporosis is a common disease that weakens bones and causes easy fractures. So from about the age of 40, calcium is lost faster than the bones can replace them. That is why after the age of 40, we need to start taking more supplements. And the same as with rickets, it doesn't help taking calcium if you don't take vitamin D. Because you don't have vitamin D, you can't absorb the calcium. Same applies here. So some people lose too much calcium, and this leads to osteoporosis. Because, okay, let me put it this way. Your little osteocyte needs calcium to make bone, more bone tissue, all right? If it doesn't have calcium, it can't make bone tissue. It also needs the calcium and everything, or the blood and the oxygen and the carbon dioxide to be removed. It's a cell. It functions like all other cells. And if it doesn't have the calcium, it has no reason to be there. So it eventually disintegrates and it stops producing the layers. So we end up with it all becoming porous. Now, women, please look at this, are 4 times more vulnerable than men, okay? Especially at the onset of menopause, because there is a lack of estrogen, okay? When there is a lack of calcium deposits, the bones become brittle. The vertebrae may weaken as a result of the compression of the spine and the discs. Okay, the wrists and the hips, they are normally bad, and just the slightest fall will cause the bones to break. Why? They're brittle. They're not compacted, they're brittle, they're dry. Women should have bone density tests done once a year from the age of 40. So they should go for bone density. This here is a picture of a little, in fact, she's not a little old lady, she's actually about 45, 50. I got this from Wikipedia, and she's completely curled over. Her spine and everything has curled over. This is from osteoporosis. It's classic osteoporosis signs. Here, those are what normal bone cells look like. And over here, you're looking at the bones with osteoporosis. So they've become, there's very little living tissue here. They become very holey, and they break, and they're brittle, so they break very easily. Okay, now we look at rheumatoid arthritis. Now, rheumatoid arthritis, there's an old wives' tale that if you drink apple cider in the morning, you have a good dollop, like a tablespoon or 2 of apple cider in the morning with warm water before you eat anything, it helps with rheumatoid arthritis. Not sure why, but I know that there are a lot of old people that swear by this, that it helps with rheumatoid arthritis. Maybe there's a doctor or some specialist out there that can tell us why it apparently does work. So the fact that it works, what does it do? Why does it work? But you look at rheumatoid arthritis, it's chronic, which means it's really bad. Inflammation or inflammatory disease. Inflammation means swelling. So chronic, really bad swelling. That's what chronic inflammatory disease is. Really bad swelling, which occurs when the joints degenerate. Okay? And this occurs mainly with older people. The body's immune system attacks its own tissue, causing the synovial joints to become painful, swollen, stiff, and inflamed. Okay, so think of all the places that we have synovial joints. Your ball and socket joints, your gliding joints, your pivot joints, and I've just, the ball and socket hinge joints, the one I missed out. So all your synovial joints start to become infected, sore and swollen, etc. In severe cases, the joints become completely immovable, so that you can't even bend them, especially in the hands and the feet. The condition begins with acute, means ana, so bad pain, and inflammation of the synovial membrane. That leads to the destruction of the cartilage. Now remember, you've got in all your joints, you've got, especially your ball and socket, you've got the articular cartilage. That's the cartilage that surrounds the bone and it surrounds the socket, so that the bone and the socket can the ball and the socket can fit nicely together. So around the joints, an osteoporosis of the bone tissue. So clearly, if you have osteoporosis, the chances are you're going to get rheumatoid arthritis. As the inflammation is reduced and the swelling decreases, the tissue forms across the joint space. When cases are severe and tissues calcify and they into a bony bridge, and that prevents the movement of the joint and permanent dysfunction. So it's almost your own body fighting itself. This is the lady's hand. This is an X-ray of her hand. Okay, so if you look at this, that's the right side of the diagram. And you look at the bones, there are the different the phalanges. Here you have the metacarpals, here are the carpals. And look at how the swelling of the joints has disfigured her poor hand. Okay, that looks incredibly sore. Now you must know that the movement in the joints of the hand are going to be very, very, very restricted, if any movement at all. Muscular dystrophy. Now look at what the word tells you. Muscular means muscles. Dystrophy, we spoke about early. Dystrophy means to actually break away, to degenerate. Okay, so muscular dystrophy is genetically inherited. So you inherit it from either your mother or your father or grandparents. And it's a disorder where there is a slow, progressive degeneration of the muscle fibers. So when you break an arm and it's put in, or a leg and a limb, and it's put into plaster, and from the lack of moving the muscles, when you take the plaster off, the muscles have dystrophied, they've almost reduced. This happens, but all over, to all the muscles, and it's genetic, okay? And it's sexually it's a sexual or XY chromosome, so it's the sex chromosome transmission. Here we have it carried on the X chromosome, which is, if it's located there, so the females will carry the gene, but will not usually suffer from the disease. So it's actually, but you do find girls that do. It starts with the weakness of the muscles of the back and around the pelvis. And then if it happens when when the muscular dystrophy kicks in when the child is little, it means that that child is never able to walk properly. All right, and very often parents will think, oh, the child is clumsy. The child's not being clumsy, it's the fact that the muscles are not working. So it starts with the weakness of the muscle in the back and around the pelvis, okay, and that causes a delay in the walking. Then the calf muscles are weak, and later there is a weakness in the arms. And when the weakness in the arms, spine begins to curve, okay, walking becomes difficult until the person actually needs a wheelchair. Muscular dystrophy also affects the walls of the heart. Now you must remember, the walls of the heart are made of cardiac muscle. So you remember, you've got cardiac and striated muscle have a lot of fibers and cross walls in them, and then you've got the smooth muscle. But your cardiac muscle is also not regulated by the will. It works completely automatically. People, well, that's it for today. We've gone through the diseases, we've gone through all the different joints. Make sure you know those joints, make sure you know what a ligament is and what a tendon is and how they work. And that's it for today. Have a good one, study hard, and make sure that you understand what you are learning.